The rain tapped on the roof of the old motel, breaking the night's silence. In his room, weary from the journey, sat David Holt, a journalist writing articles about forgotten places. He was driving through this forsaken town in Maine when he saw the sign, Riverstone Lake, 4 miles. The name seemed familiar, but he couldn't immediately remember why. Subscribe to not miss the next videos. It wasn't until he entered the room that the memories came flooding back. Riverstone Lake. 25 years ago, his friend Brian drowned here. His body was never found. Back then, they were kids, a lively group of 5, and that day marked the end of their friendship. No one spoke of it aloud, but each of them felt it. Brian's death was strange. It was as if something had pulled him down. Now, sitting in the room with cheap wallpaper, David felt a chill creeping inside. The memories came alive like a nightmare, just waiting to resurface. The next morning, he went to the local library. The town was old, and surely its archives could provide information about the mysterious disappearances. The elderly librarian, clearly surprised by the visitor, reluctantly pointed him to the old newspapers. Flipping through the yellowed pages, he found an article from 15 years ago. Boy drowned in Riverstone Lake, body never found. The article was a dry statement of facts, but one detail caught his attention. It said this was not the first case. David began to dig deeper. The more he searched, the more troubling details surfaced. It turned out that every few decades, someone would disappear without a trace in this lake. The locals preferred not to talk about these stories, but in old records he found a note from 1923. The disappearance of 3 fishermen. 1887, a man drowned, and his partner swore that he saw his friend go into the water unnaturally, as if something had dragged him down. David wrote down all the strange incidents. It became clear this was a repeating pattern. He decided to speak to the locals, but he was met with silent resistance. Anyone he asked questions to either waved him off or simply walked away, except for an old man at the gas station who whispered quietly,
"You're not the first to search for the truth, but no one has ever left here with answers."
Subscribe if you want to know what happens next. The next morning, he drove to the lake. The fog hung over the water, making it look like a mirror without reflection. The boat dock was empty, the planks weathered and cracked, but a lone wooden boat still rocked by the shore, as if someone had used it recently. David looked around. As children, they swam here, dived, played. This was where Brian disappeared. He remembered his scream, short, muffled, full of terror. He sat on a log and threw a stone into the water. The ripples spread out, then disappeared. Silence, and then a soft splash. He looked at the water and froze. For a moment, he thought he saw Brian's face above the water near the boat, pale with empty eyes. Then it disappeared. A chill ran through him. In the evening, he found an old bar. It was the same as 25 years ago. Creaky stools, the smell of spilled beer, the same old bartender behind the counter. David ordered a bourbon.
"Are you one of those people who come here to search for ghosts?"
The bartender asked, wiping a glass. David raised an eyebrow.
Why do you think that?
"Locals don't go to the lake. Only outsiders.
The bartender looked at him with a hint of sympathy.
And then they disappear."
A legend?
David asked.
"Well, let's say.
The bartender leaned in closer.
They say there's something in the lake. Not fish, not moss. It waits for someone to enter the water."
At night, David couldn't sleep. The images of the lake, Brian's face by the water, they circled in his mind. At 2 o'clock, he was already behind the wheel, heading back to the dock. The moon hung low, casting a dim light on the surface. He stood by the shore when he heard a sound, a splash, slow, heavy. He froze. The water shifted. Something slowly rose from the depths. David held his breath. The silhouette became clearer. It was a man, or something that once was a man. Brian. His face was pale, bloated, but the features were recognizable. Rotten fingers rose above the surface, reaching out to him. Eyes, empty, without pupils, without life, only darkness inside. David couldn't move. Brian's face opened its mouth, and no air came out, only darkness, thick and sticky.
"You didn't save me, Dave,"
whispered a voice that couldn't belong to the living. And the darkness stretched toward him. He tried to retreat, but something dragged him into the water. He had no control over his body and simply walked from the dock into the water. Cold, wet, like hands that no longer belonged to the living. David screamed in terror, but the scream drowned in the thick air. The water began to engulf him, pulling him deeper. He was choking, and air was running out. The world went dark. A few days passed. The boat at the dock disappeared, just like the latest investigative journalist. Local fishermen said that one night they saw a strange silhouette by the lake, tall, thin, with empty eyes. It stood on the shore as if waiting for something. Then it slowly walked into the water. The next day, closer to evening, a man sat in the corner of the old bar. No one saw how he arrived. His face was pale and his gaze empty. He ordered a bourbon but didn't drink. The bartender felt a chill run down his spine. While the bartender turned away to arrange the glasses, the man left, just as silently as he had come, leaving behind only a faint smell of dampness and rot, as well as a wet trail on the floor. The bartender sighed heavily. He had seen him before. This man appeared every time someone disappeared in the lake. It was as if he took their bodies, gained strength from fresh flesh, and was able to emerge to the surface. He looked at the dark window, and for a moment he thought someone was standing outside, but it was just a passerby hurrying on his way.
Hit like button and subscribe if you want more stories like this.